Let's consider a person right here, Abaku, in the middle, trying to figure out what kind of person he wants to be. Should he become a righteous warrior and protector of good, or a self-caring and ruthless villain, who is dedicated to serving only himself? Or a non-caring nihilist who just wants to please his own instincts and desires in whatever way he sees fit? He needs answers, and he decides to seek the truth at whatever cost necessary, even if this truth will horrify and sadden him. I, as a narrator for him, will share with you his journey. At first he needs to clean up all of the existing concepts in his mind, in order to reset his knowledge graph, so that he can try to build out something new. Everything that he is not sure is proven, he marks as undefined: karma, luck, fate, God, devil, and others. After he has cleaned up all of the existing concepts in his mind, he tried to create new ones, and the first one of them is individual. He defined an individual as a separate instance of a certain type, biological, technological, or abstract. An individual also was defined to have mechanisms within himself, systems that make up an individual and can perform actions, and resources that feed the mechanism of an individual. Then he went one level above and defined the society and environment where this society lives. Society is a set of individuals that can interact with each other. An environment is a set of objects and concepts with which individuals can interact. And with that, individuals were defined as such that can interact with other individuals or with the environment. The definition is intentionally very general, so that the following laws that I will describe will be applicable in many situations. As you can see here, even a colored triangle in a world of colored triangles is considered an individual as well. And the third final straw of concepts: philosophy, God, devil, and nihilism. Philosophy was defined as a model of behavior for an individual and the entire society as a whole. This is where all of the rules, ideals, and traditions reside in and originate from. Devil was defined as the best philosophy for the survival of an individual in a given set of environments, or one environment. God was defined as the best philosophy for the survival of a society in a given set of environments, or one environment. Abaku has defined God and devil as philosophies, as models of behavior, a set of rules that are aimed to serve some objective goal. And finally, the one and only nihilism was defined as a philosophy in which an individual tries to interact with his own mechanisms in order to get as much happiness as possible during his lifetime. Now, let's start building out some test subjects, societies with different properties, in order to figure out which societies would at least survive, and which ones would become extinct. Pathological society is a society in which each individual acts in accordance to his devil, that is, it works to obtain as many resources as possible, with the help and in the context of the work of other individuals. Each individual allocates resources in a way that ensures the survival and continued success of himself and his species. Putting it simply, it's a society where everyone only cares about themselves. Neutral society is a society where individuals do not interact with each other, except to perpetuate the genus, if necessary for their species. According to the proof that you can read in more detail in the book in the description, neutral society has an evolutionary advantage over a pathological society. The reason for this is pretty simple. In pathological society, every individual tries to do everything he can to take away resources from other individuals, which produces conflict, and this conflict in total leaves out this pathological society with less resources than in neutral society. Let's take a quick step back and introduce two new terms: identical individual and different individual. Identical individuals are individuals that have the same resources and consist of the same mechanisms. Different individuals are individuals who have a different set of resources and consist of different mechanisms. Individuals can be different not only when they have different innate characteristics or professions. For example, imagine two identical individuals decide to join forces for hunting. One of them climbs a tree with a bow, the other runs up to the tiger and starts teasing it and luring it to the tree. When the tiger approaches the tree, the one outside the tree shoots a bow, and both get their prey. These, in all innate characteristics, identical individuals, made themselves different individuals, just by putting themselves in different situations. Let's review our first axiom of individual divergence, which states that each individual has an indeterminate and random set of variations which make him different from others, and as a result, gives him advantages in some areas of the survival work and makes him weaker in other areas of the survival work. Which basically means that each individual is at least somewhat different from others, and has at least some advantages in terms of the work that he can do. But for the purposes of a mind experiment, let's investigate what would happen if all individuals were completely identical to one another. A society of neutral identical individuals has an evolutionary advantage over a society of interacting identical individuals, because for any interaction, individuals would use resources, and as a result of this interaction, in total, only fewer resources would remain in society, due to the fact that resources were spent on interaction. And they would also not gain any benefit from that interaction since they are identical, and therefore have no advantages in any areas of work, so that interaction would only be a waste of resources. To create the best society, identical individuals must create a neutral society. Since any interaction between the same individuals does not make sense, the best option is to create a neutral society. Identical individuals have no evolutionary reason to interact, without explanation. Identical individuals have no evolutionary reason to be useful, since there is no reason to interact. The very concept of usefulness cannot be applied to an individual in a neutral society. Only different individuals have an evolutionary reason to interact, and only different individuals have an evolutionary reason to be useful. Since individuals can be either the same or different, only different individuals have an evolutionary reason to interact and be useful. The concept of interaction is applicable only to different individuals, and the concept of usefulness is applicable only to different individuals, without explanation. To preserve the concepts of interaction and usefulness, individuals need to remain different only and exclusively. The fact that we can be different gives us a reason to interact, and that is, to be useful, because only when we are different we have a reason to interact. Now, let's go back to comparing our societies. First, let's imagine that there is a society where each individual happens to be the most useful individual for this society. Each individual can potentially make all sorts of doings over his lifespan, good and bad, for the survivability of the society, and let's imagine that in this society, all individuals happen to do those actions that are most useful for the survivability of that society. For example, Peter is a student that decided to stop procrastinating all day, and start his own business. His set of all possible actions is, continue procrastinating, start his own business. Among the set of all possible actions that he could do with his life, he chose an action that, in the context of society, gives the most evolutionary advantage to society. Therefore Peter is a useful individual. Another example, John is a horrible serial killer that killed a lot of people before being captured by police. Due to his brutalities, there has been a new wave of police and justice reforms in his country, which improved the life of its citizens. Despite the fact that John did not want to be a useful individual of the society, ironically, in this situation he actually became a useful individual to the society, since his actions initiated a wave of reforms in his country. Let's take another side route into the concept of specialization. Specialization is the establishment and adjustment by an individual of such an environment around him and his own mechanisms that would contribute to the performance of a certain set of actions, i.e., the one for which the individual will have to do the minimum number of pre-actions. Specialized individual that is specialized in executing a certain set of actions A. Specialized individual that is specialized on a certain set of actions A is better at performing them than individual that is not specialized on that set A. Basically, what it means is that if an individual trains to be a doctor, he will be better at executing actions of a doctor. Healing people, if an individual trains to be a plumber, he will be better at executing actions of a plumber. Now, onto another comparison of the society of the most useful specialized individuals. You know how it works by now. Society of most useful specialized individuals is a society of the specialized individuals that specialize to execute subset of actions A, where A is a set of actions that are required for surviving of the society. Society of most useful specialized individuals has an evolutionary advantage over the society without such characteristics. Again, you can get the more rigorous proof in my book, but in short terms, if you specialize on one area of work of benefit your society, and others will do the same, together you will be more efficient at surviving than a group of non-specialized individuals. And finally, the society of virtuous individuals. Society of the virtuous individuals is a society that consists of individuals that have God as the primary and fundamental goal, from which all other goals emerge. Society of the virtuous individuals has an evolutionary advantage, compared to societies of non-virtuous individuals. This is true, because if each individual will actually try and make an effort to be the most useful individual for the society, it is more likely that he will become one. The more you try, the more probable you will achieve it, and in the society of virtuous individuals, every one of them tries to become useful to the society, and this is what gives them an advantage to other societies. We have determined that a virtuous society survives when each individual sets himself the goal of bringing as much benefit as possible to the society. Those societies whose individuals serve one God, survive, and God is written in their genetics, becomes their conscience, their inner voice, their ideals, their superego, and then even their irresistible instincts. While those societies, whose individuals serve their own devil, because there is only one God in society, and everyone has their own devil, are dying out. It is because of this, by the way, that humanity needs to keep dividing itself into many other societies, nations, countries, religions, because, with such a division, it is more likely that virtuous societies will survive among this set. If all humanity is united in one society, and it turns out that this society is not virtuous, all humanity risks extinction. And the idea of mutual aid, love, justice, rights, etc. are not directly related to God, although they are a part of Him to one degree or another. The main idea that leads to God is the idea of self-sacrifice. Every time you decide to do as God says, you are not doing as devil tells you. Every time you do something for the benefit of society, you lose the opportunity to benefit yourself. Rarely, the God of your society and your devil coincide, and then you do what is usually called business, commerce, that is, an equal exchange of efforts, where you spend half of your efforts for the benefit of yourself, and half for the benefit of society. But societies where each individual serves God completely, i.e. goes to complete self-sacrifice, have an evolutionary advantage over societies of commerce, so there are no limits in serving God. There is no measure at which an individual can calmly say, I have done my part, now I can relax and live for myself, because societies with such individuals die out, compared to societies where each individual tries to constantly become more and more useful to society, to serve better and better for the God of his society. That's why the main symbol of Christianity is a person who sacrificed himself for the sins of all others. Every sin of one person, that is, every time a person has served the philosophy of his devil, automatically imposes more work on another person, for every sin is a blow to the evolutionary advantage of society, and because of this, self-sacrifice for the sins of all others is the central symbol of the most popular religion in the world. This dynamic is best seen in the family, in a kind of closed mini-society, where every action of one partner, where he tilts the scales in the direction of his devil with his actions or words, the other partner, if he wants to save the family, must serve the God of his family twice as much, for itself and for its partner, and to resolve a conflict, or a quarrel, or a mistake of your partner. Good, we have proven that virtue will win eventually, but what if Abaku simply does not care? What if he is ready to serve God, devil or nihilism and he does not have any specific inclination towards any of those choices? What should he choose then? Well, if he is an abstract individual, then there is no answer, but Abaku is a human that lives in the real world and needs a real-world answer now. He doesn't care that much about what survives, although it is useful to know, he cares about what he should do. Let's answer this question, but before that, let's review one last piece of information about the human psyche. Since we need to give an answer to Abaku, who is a human, we need to at least grasp what a human is. ID, ego, and superego. 3 parts from which you can model the human psyche. ID, primitive, instinctive, and innate aspects of personality, sleep, food, defecation, copulation. It is here, it seems to me, that the human character, or at least the greater part of it, is located. Researcher or conservative is about ID, industrious or lazy is about ID, extrovert or introvert is about ID, good or bad is about ID, nervous or calm is about ID. The ego is a component of the mental apparatus responsible for making decisions. When we talk about ourself in our psyche or our consciousness in our psyche, we are usually talking about the ego. The superego is the last component of the personality that develops, functionally defining a system of values, norms, and ethics that are reasonably compatible with those accepted in the individual's environment. Here are our ideals, our political views, the upbringing of our parents, and our society. There it is, time to answer what Abaku should do in the world, that we described previously. Every person needs a philosophy according to which the individual will orient what is right and what is wrong. This philosophy resides in the superego, or it is the superego. The problem begins when a person asks himself, is my philosophy correct? Imagine 2 points in the first figure below. Which one is higher than the other? It is impossible to answer this question until the viewer adds a coordinate system that would determine where the top is and where the bottom is. In the next figure, this coordinate system has appeared, and now we can say that point A is higher than point B. These first two figures depict two states of the individual: the first, where the individual has no philosophy; the second, where the individual has a certain philosophy. But in the third figure, the situation is when the individual begins to ask himself, is my philosophy correct? Is point A really higher than point B? Maybe it's the other way around. You can, of course, accept this second coordinate system as correct, that is, change the philosophy to another, but then, from the fourth figure, sooner or later the same question will begin to torment you again: is this philosophy now correct? In mathematics, this question does not concern us, because this question does not question all of us and everything that we do. This question makes no sense just like that, because philosophy itself determines what is right and what is wrong, but still this question torments the individual. But then how to get out of this closed circle? Is there any better question we can ask ourselves? Some judge who will determine which philosophy is correct and which is not? It seemed obvious that it was God, but since the philosophy of God determines its own meaning, there is still no judge who would determine God or devil is right. This is the problem of self-knowledge. Self-knowledge leads to understanding yourself and the world. Understanding yourself and the world leads to the fact that you understand that meaning. Truth appears when a coordinate system, philosophy, appears, and the mind logically leads you to the following question: then what is the meaning of philosophy? Does the coordinate system itself look up or down? And we could then simply say, meaning is relative, but then we would basically say, your existence is relative. All your emotions are relative, all your efforts, tears, joy and sorrow are relative, and, just turn the arrow, and they should all stop make sense to you. For example, let's imagine that you are an engineer who has worked in a factory for 20 years, losing most of his health, in order to give his children a better education. If you tell Ivan that the meaning is relative, then you are actually telling him that his 20 years of work, when he worked for the sake of his children, is all relative, and should he only adopt a different philosophy, which he can do in an instant, then all this must immediately cease to occupy him, which means that, most importantly and most painfully, all his past efforts and sufferings will, in one moment, become for him not a proud gains for the sake of the family, but a waste of time. I suspect that evolution has not yet fixed the human brain enough for it to be comfortable admitting this. Our mind can choose any coordinate system, philosophy, it wants. He is capable of this, but this ability of the mind brings pain to all other parts of the person, his ideals, his emotions, even his instincts. But, as the first step, it is necessary to allow the mind this opportunity, to forgive it for the opportunity to play such tricks with philosophy. This is the first step. The second step is to understand that the second part of you, your subconscious ideals, emotions, and instincts, will require a constant philosophy from you, and in addition each of these parts will require a philosophy of your own. Your character if Koga will demand from you a philosophy where you will sacrifice yourself, your instincts will demand from you a high social status, fame, etc. Your super-ego will require you to choose an ideal that corresponds to the ideals of your society, your parents. So you have a mind capable of setting any coordinate system, and a set of, most often, conflicting subconscious forces that push you to choose one philosophy or another. In the third step, you must realize that you cannot choose a philosophy that is perfect for every part of you, but you know that you must choose one philosophy. Now about defining arch philosophy. The fourth step. Temporary arch philosophy. Whatever you try, when you choose a philosophy for yourself, then you have to at first, at least temporarily, choose some kind of arch philosophy for yourself, through which you will choose your philosophy of life. And here is the most terrible thing: I have thought about it for a long time, but no matter how terrible it is, I cannot think of any way that would make God an arch philosophy. I cannot prove that God is something that humans should use as a measure of philosophies, as an initial coordinate system. Arch philosophy is so difficult to define, because its definition cannot be guided by the words necessary, truth, what the heart suggests, etc. No matter what, there is no solution to this damn recursion. If you try to use logic to define arch philosophy, the question immediately arises: what kind of arch philosophy? And what kind of logic? Because every logic must be guided by some prerequisites, but the problem is that the definition of arch philosophy is the definition of prerequisites, so that even logic itself is powerless here. You can't even throw a coin here, because a random algorithm is also an algorithm, that is, also a logic. The task of defining arch philosophy is similar to the task where you need to find a black cat in a dark room, despite the fact that you are a blind person. Only when you find the cat, you will be able to see. But you can't find the cat because you're still blind. Now about nihilism as arch philosophy. And what to do then? Here, the next terrible conclusion begins: nihilism. If there is no logic, and there is no arch orientation to determine the orientation, one will simply choose an arch philosophy, consciously or unconsciously, honestly or not, through nihilism. One will take and calculate all the options of philosophies that one can choose. For the average individual it is God or rarely devil, we also talked about this. Then for each philosophy one will calculate how happy one will be if one accepts this philosophy. One will also take into account efforts to move to this philosophy. For example, if one moves to HOD, then you need to educate yourself, start serving people, etc., considering efforts to support this philosophy, also taking into account their current philosophy, and how difficult it will be for them to change it. For example, if a teenager who was brought up with one philosophy when he was still a child, now wants to choose a philosophy for himself, etc., etc. And after calculating all the combinations, one will choose the one that suits them the most, accept it as a philosophy and serve it. A person will do the same process for themselves if they ever need to change their philosophy. I can't imagine that an average person would do differently, whether they admit it or not. If there is no guide to choose an arch philosophy in order to choose a philosophy, then how else would the average person act other than simply choose the philosophy that most appeals to him? Because of this, it is necessary to raise children in the Spirit of God, so that they choose Him when they grow up. This is a scary thing, because now when you look into the eyes of each person, you will know that most of them, whether they admit it or not, have chosen the philosophy that serves them best. Of course, there may still be mutations, such as self-deception, but these are details. Perhaps because of this, cynics are sometimes portrayed as the wisest in art, because they know on some level that there is no objective arch philosophy, God, judge who would say what is true and what is not. And that is, they know that every person is still guided by nihilism when deciding which philosophy to serve. And each of us will have to admit this, and go through, at least, and I hope only once, this ugly and unpleasant process of baptism with nihilism. This is a terrible truth, and although it is hard to accept, even after it I remain optimistic. Evolution will do its thing, and sooner or later God will enter into the soul of each individual, so that few will choose anything else for themselves. Unless we burn each other to nuclear ash before then, of course. This terrible truth also gives us a better understanding of how to better serve God. Here I am addressing those who have chosen God and are honest enough with themselves not to hide devil somewhere in their bosom. We need to recognize that only society is the bearer and protector of God. No one will punish the servants of devil, the ground will not collapse under their feet, fate itself will not bring them misfortune, they will not be punished by the karma, and the universe will not turn away from them. There are only servants of God and servants of devil, and a handful of those who chose something else. There is no objective and all-powerful God who will protect everyone and do everything for people, no. To fight for God is the responsibility of His servants. Now about nihilism. You may ask, then why not change my philosophy constantly? I will make such an arch philosophy for myself, according to which I will be able to update my philosophy of life whenever I want. I will call myself a nihilist, and I will adjust my ideals to myself as I want at any moment. I'll switch between God, the devil, etc. as I please. Well, let's imagine for a moment that you have the unique, almost superhuman ability to change your ideals on the fly and whenever you want, and you don't feel disgust for yourself about it. My answer is, do what you want. I cannot define the rules of what arch philosophy should be, so choose and do what you want, but beware that for the servants of God, such nihilists are even more sworn enemies than the servants of devil, because they are even more dangerous than the servants of devil. By the way, here is proof why a person should not have control over all aspects of their self, so that all humanity does not become such nihilists in one day. Some things must be fixed in a person, such as their philosophy. But until evolution didn't fix it completely, we will have to go through this baptism with nihilism and fight against those who did not choose God. This is a terrible truth also because every person, until evolution solves this problem, will have a constant temptation to surrender to this nihilism, to change their philosophy, and with it their perception of their past, and every person will have to live with this disgusting thought that still want to surrender to nihilism and adjust their perception of the world so that it is easier for them, for example, to live with her past, or easier to work with their future. This is probably the worst and most disgusting. Perhaps it is precisely because of this that humanity does not want to give up the idea that God is objective, because as soon as you stop recognizing it, you immediately feel the desire to become a nihilist, and immediately after that a cross appears that falls on you as a heavy burden. And you stand in the middle of the roads and you don't know what's worse, to live in doubt whether your philosophy is correct, or admit that philosophy is not objective, which in itself is already painful, and bear the cross of disgust from the desire to indulge in nihilism, and the fear that others carry the same cross and may not be able to hold it. Now about objective philosophy and arch-nihilism. Also, you should select a philosophy that has some objective goal rather than a subjective one, e.g. survival of you, devil, or survival of a society, God. You cannot define a subjective goal, to make me feel good, because in that case you will actually define a goal for yourself that can be solved by changing your subjective perception. And this root note, to change the subjective, will constantly push the mind to change its philosophy, which will lead to constant changes in your own mechanisms of happiness. But our mechanisms of happiness are definitely not sharpened to endlessly change ourselves in order for those same mechanisms to generate more dopamine. They are focused on achieving an objective goal: find food, find shelter, cross the river. So the individual's mechanisms may be more focused on God or devil, but they are definitely not focused on changing themselves in order to produce more positive emotions. This is actually even crazier than nihilism. I was describing a case where a nihilist can constantly change his philosophy of life through arch-philosophy, while this is the case of a man who has made an arch-philosophy his philosophy of life. This idea is even more crazy, because in this case you don't adjust your life philosophy, twist and move the coordinate system, as you like, you generally combine the point, your current state, and the coordinate system into one concept. And since even our mind can't do this, the result is that you are constantly jerking the coordinate system from one point to another, depending on your current state of life, and because of this, all your mechanisms and psyche cannot even get used to these constant changes, and they cannot give you any happiness, because they do not understand where the coordinate system is, where the point is, and why both are constantly changing, and because of this they do not understand how and when to give happiness. Calculate the vector of happiness. Your dopamine mechanisms are simply nauseating. Let's call this thinking arch-nihilism, but I doubt that an individual and even any intelligence is capable of functioning with such thinking. For example, you can't choose the goal, I want to feel in love, because then your mind will have two fundamental points of influence, two root nodes, if you will. It will think, should I find a partner or should I code myself to feel in love just like that? E.g. by watching romantic comedies? You can't have two root goals, otherwise you will constantly conflict between them. And in the case when one of the goals is generated by arch-nihilism, then they will not just conflict with each other, they will destroy, or will damage, your mechanisms of happiness. And although I said that everyone can do what they want, I will make a summary for myself. First, turn on arch-nihilism, choose a philosophy, an objective one in order to avoid the disorientation that subjective philosophies give. Turn off arch-nihilism and never return to it, unless I really feel that something is wrong. From what I described, one baptism should be enough for me, but experience still suggests that there should always be a key to change for everything, even for such a fundamental thing as one's own philosophy. At least to take into account that my subjective logic may be wrong, or does not cover all the information about the world. Second, there is no need for any oaths, notes, rituals, etc. My commitment to the philosophy and to this rule must be self-sufficient, have power in itself, and not hide or be confirmed behind some oaths or papers or promises. This rule and this section in itself is the primary truth, on the basis of which I will continue to implement my philosophy, make promises, oaths, etc. One cannot swear an oath about management of philosophies, because the rules of management philosophies determine whether it is necessary to keep your oaths and promises.